was classified, Trump still maintained that, quote, there was no harm done because the attack was unbelievably successful, close quote. For WPFW News in Washington and WBAI in New York, I'm Sue Goodwin.
WPFW family, and welcome to another episode of Short Money, Dissecting Racial Capitalism. I am your host, John Jeter. Here we explore each week the economic system known as racial capitalism that exploits all workers, but Black and brown workers most of all. Just a little bit about myself. I am a former Washington Post foreign correspondent, former producer for the popular documentary radio program, This American Life, the author of Black Broke in the Free Market, How Globalization Fleeced Working People, and most recently, Class War in America, How the Elites Divide the Nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? I begin each episode of Short Money by recounting Election Day in 1992. I was a 27-year-old City Hall reporter for the Detroit Free Press. The Democrats had by then been out of office for 12 years. And the mostly African-American city was hoping that Bill Clinton would be first past the post and help the Motor City return to prosperity. In those pre-internet days, throngs of politicians and civil servants gathered on the first floor of Detroit City Hall to await the results, erupting in applause when it was finally announced that Clinton had indeed pulled out the W. As the celebration waned, however, and the high fives and backslapping subsided, one Black politician said presciently, "It really don't matter, though. The president can be Democrat or Republican, Black or white. The Dow Jones can go up or down 500 points. Black folks gonna still be poor." Our show, Short Money, is a tacit acknowledgement of this central fact of American life, and we ask here simply, why? So far on Short Money, we have attempted to answer the question by interrogating everything from Black unemployment to Black indebtedness, the hollowing out of the manufacturing sector, the twin scourges of austerity and privatization, the news media's trafficking in narratives that support neoliberalism, the value of cash, strategies for economic redress, immigration, Donald Trump's peculiar economic policies, and the need for a single-payer health care system, to name just a few. Today, we want to discuss the relationship between Russia, the erstwhile Soviet Union, and African Americans, and the African continent overall. In thinking of a title, I was thinking that maybe we could go with Vladimir Putin ain't never called me the N-word. Here to help me untangle this Gordian knot is a really special guest, Daniel Welch. Daniel Patrick Welch is a writer of political commentary and analysis. He lives and writes in Salem, Massachusetts with his wife, Julia. Together, they run the Greenhouse School. He has traveled widely, speaks 5 languages, studied Russian history and literature at Harvard University. He has also appeared as a guest on several TV and radio channels to speak on topics on foreign affairs and political analysis. Welcome, Daniel Patrick Welch, a good friend of mine. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate being invited.
For sure. We should have done it a lot sooner, but you're so busy. I have to ask you though, Daniel. I was thinking about our conversation earlier, and I just have to ask you this question. I think it's it's just been on my mind since we talked a few hours ago. You are one of 8 children, and your wife is one of 8 children. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. She's near the top and I'm at the very bottom.
Okay. It made me think about that. There must be some sort of mathematical theory, right, to show that never happens. It happens once in like every gazillion marriages.
I can't imagine the odds. Yeah. But things always work out their own magic. My constant complaint, I think she's in the other room, but I can hear her rolling her eyes. Because she's the second, so she was kind of in charge of the little kid. So even though we're about 10 years apart, she should be my younger sister, but instead she has always acted as the older sister. We had six boys and 2 girls in my family, so there were 2 older sisters. So I was always bossed around by older sisters. So poetry, right? But it's history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
I think that's the one thing that Mark Twain got wrong. I think it actually repeats. But yeah, I guess the women always sort of revert to form one way or another. And maybe the men too.
Daniel, listen. A note that says 12 years, not 10.
Right. So Daniel,
she just cut down her anniversary present this weekend.
Right. Well, hey,
I needed some excuse.
Right. Daniel, I want to get started by talking about the historic relationship, or the relationship historically between African Americans and what was the Soviet Union, which is now, of course, Russia. And it struck me, because I've written a book about this, or at least a book that talks a little bit about this, that this week, 94 years ago, police near Scottsboro, Alabama, arrested 9 Black teenagers for sexually assaulting 2 white women. The white women turned out to be sex workers, and of course, the assault did not happen. But what's really interesting in the context of this show is that the Soviet Union had been looking to foment a worldwide workers' revolution since the Bolsheviks took power in 1917. Mm-hmm. And at the 6th Congress of the Communist International, or Comintern, the assembly proclaimed in 1928, quote, it is essential for the Communist Party to make an energetic beginning now, at the present moment, with the organization of joint mass struggles of white and Black workers against Negro oppression. This alone will enable us to get rid of the bourgeois white chauvinism, which is polluting the ranks of the white workers in America, to overcome the distrust of the Negro masses caused by the inhuman, barbarous Negro slave traffic still carried on by the American bourgeois. Remember, this is 1928.
Right.
In as much as it is directed even against all white workers, and to win over to our side these millions of Negroes as active fellow fighters in the struggle for the overthrow of bourgeois power throughout America. The Scottsboro Boys case, as it was called, represented the opportunity that the communists were looking for. They descended upon Scottsboro the way the Allies would descend on the beach in Normandy 13 years later, working with Black organizers. The movement to stop the Scottsboro frame-up, as they called it, not only freed or exonerated all of the defendants, but it was the catalyst for the New Deal, which was the catalyst of the Civil Rights Movement, and led ultimately to the creation of the singular miracle of the industrial age, the American middle class. Hold on, Dan. I just want to reach this one last part. I want to get you to toss on this.
I like
to prepare for this worldwide communist takeover, the Soviet Union opened the Communist University of the Toilers of the East, known by its Russian acronym KUTVA, K-U-T-V-A. Scores of African Americans enrolled in KUTVA to pore over texts by Marx and Lenin and study topics that included Russian language, economics, labor organizing, and revolutionary theory. The Bolsheviks opened the university in 1921 to train the scores of nationalities within the Soviet Union's borders and revolutionaries from around the world. The university would close in the late 1930s as World War II dawned, but its graduates included such historical figures as Ho Chi Minh, Jomo Kenyatta, and Deng Xiaoping. I always mispronounce his name, Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah.
One of the Black organizers on the ground in Scottsboro was Harry Haywood. In his autobiography, Haywood recalled a drunk staggering aboard a half-empty Moscow streetcar one late afternoon in the late 1920s. Seeing Haywood with a group of his Black classmates, the inebriate mumbled loud enough for everyone to hear, "Black devils in our country." Here is what happened next, according to Haywood. Quote, "A group of outraged Russian passengers thereupon seized him and ordered the motorman to stop the car. It was a citizen's arrest, the first I had ever witnessed. How dare you, you scum, insult people who are the guests of our country?" What then occurred was an impromptu, on-the-spot meeting where the Russians on the streetcar debated what to do with the man. I was to see, quote, "I was to see many of this kind of meeting during my stay in Russia," Haywood wrote. "It was decided to take the culprit to the police station, which the conductor informed them was a few blocks ahead. Upon arrival there, they hustled the drunk out of the car and insisted that we Blacks, as the injured parties, come along to make the charges. At first, we demurred, saying that the man was obviously drunk and not responsible for his remarks. 'No, citizens,' said a young man, 'drunk or not, we don't allow this sort of thing in our country. You must come with us to the militia, to the police station, and prefer charges against this man.'" And that must be proper, yeah. Anyway, the car stopped in front of the station. The poor drunk was hustled off, and all the passengers came along. The defendant had sobered up somewhat by this time and began apologizing before we had even entered the building. We got to the commandant of the station. The drunk swore that he didn't mean what he'd said. "I was drunk and angry about something else. I swear to you, citizens, that I have no race prejudice against those Black, is it gospoda, which means gentlemen." I wanted to start off with this story, which I just find one of, I really researched my book, Class War in America, for probably more than 10 years. And this, to me, this story is like, of all the stories that I sort of discovered, this to me is like the most memorable. I just can't, it almost seems made up, right? But
Yeah.
the reason I bring it up, Daniel, is because you mentioned, when we were talking earlier, you talked about the reason that the Soviet Union's revolution was acutely aware of racial prejudice, and that is because Tsarist Russia, before the Bolshevik Revolution, was known throughout the world as the prison house of nations. Can you tell us a little bit about the prison house of nations, how it operated, and why it resonated with someone like Harry Haywood and many other Blacks, particularly in the 30s and 40s, as the Communist Party was at the height of its influence in the United States?
Sure. That was what Lenin called it. Referred to the empire as a prison house of nations.
More than like 100, was like 130 ethnicities and nationalities. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. And what the thing that always, it's really hard to talk about the history of the Soviet Union because there is such an entrenched counter narrative that just spits on everything that comes out. That comes out, in my one visit to the Soviet Union, what people read, and Like you can see, for example, from the beginning, not as part of the wave that took the West in the 60s with the civil rights movement and the 68 social pink wave and all that, but it was doctrinaire from the very beginning, because what they were saying was that the idea of imperialism, this is both Marx and Lenin, that it is using exploitation and substituting class for nationality, that you're using nations as workers. And so the exploitation and the extraction of profit from owning and controlling that labor input is comparable. And so that this would be the final stage of capitalism was imperialism. And they turned it inward by saying that what Russia had done was, these were all, internal and contiguous, and became this prison house of nations. And a huge part of the social apparatus was the spreading of what was 15 Soviet socialist republics, and the massive attention to nationality, to language and culture, and all these things that made it home for all these people. And now you have this Haywood memory, and you have lots of cynicism that moves in toward the decline of Soviet power. But you're talking about 50, 60 years where this was absolute. And we talked also about South Africa and Angola and all of what happened in Southeast Asia, all of these natural alliances that were dismissed by the West as just Cold War, just fighting, just doing, just trying to get under the U.S. Power structure and under the skin of the U.S., was a central and organizational part of what the state was about.
Right,
and
right.
Sadly, you could go back, you could also take Paul Robeson. Look at what Paul Robeson's and I'm glad you used the never called me N-word, because
Right.
it's in Vietnam, but it was also in Moscow in the 30s and 40s. When Paul Robeson was there, and then saw himself as embraced as a human being.
Yeah.
And this is done, there are hundreds of examples of this. Think of what an American, especially a Black, African American, would think in the 20s,
right,
being in that and have that whole story play out with people, the heady beginning of the revolution, and where people were secure in their beliefs in what they were building. It's pretty amazing.
It is extraordinary, and one of the things I think I came to I think I suspected it before I started writing this book, but one of the things that really struck me was Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin had this. I don't know if there ever existed, maybe present company excluded, Dan, because but I don't know if there were ever two white men who ever existed who understood the use of racism to drive capitalism better than Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin. And what I mean by that is that what Lenin understood, and Karl Marx wrote about this as well. He wrote to the American people right after the Civil War was won, urging whites not to reconcile with blacks and not to hold any grudges. I mean, you talk about turning a deaf ear. But Lenin, understood, as did many Russians, including the ones who were on this streetcar. He understood that the czars used ethnicities to pit them, the Russian Empire, to pit them against each other. And in that way, they didn't turn against the czars, who were robbing everyone blind. And one of the things that really struck me was that the ones who were the most oppressed, or the most sort of targeted as part of these pogroms, was the Jewish community in Tsarist Russia. And that really resonated even with Harry Haywood. He talked about this in speeches he would give, and after riots in Detroit, he said, let's not fall for the same trick they used in Tsarist Russia, where they, turned everyone against the Jews, right? I think the word for pogrom even comes from a Yiddish word, I think. So it's striking that and then there's the debt question, right? Where Tsarist Russia got the country into it was the largest debt burden in the world by 1917. And that's very anticipates what we see now, where the United States, we have nearly $40 trillion in public debt, right? Which is unsustainable, and which is the source of our discontent. So I say all this to ask you, right? I wonder if you've been to Russia, you've studied Russia, but I wonder if there's not this sort of understanding, because I don't think, despite the fact that we've got this sort of black bourgeoisie now that mimics, that parrots the white elite, but I don't think you would find a lot of, even today, I don't think you'd find a lot of hostility held by blacks against Russia or Vladimir Putin. And I just wondered, do you think that there's sort of we almost intuit that we share these similarities in our oppression or in our history?
Yeah, I think that what we talked about earlier, the overlap with the Irish question, that this was natural back home, and then as soon as you got off the boat, you could choose to be white, and it would change your life forever. That was, but class and race are bonded together in the same way that they were the N-words of Europe. The Slavs in Russia before the revolution were feudalized. You had, in a very real sense, rich families of white Europeans, Habsburgs, and all these people were intermarried, interconnected, and the aristocracy was Europe-leaning, much. It's not a question of skin color anymore than it was for the Irish, but there is a class division and a racial attribute to it. These are subhumans, and in serfdom, of course, it was a form of feudal slavery. It was not chattel slavery, but it was very much a form of slavery. Feudal serfdom, which was a huge yoke around most of the population in the country, erstwhile Soviet Union. And so it was completely natural to see the two as fitting in the same opposition to oppression. That's completely makes sense. Now, what really is interesting, and that's one is I'm Irish, or of Irish descent. I married an African. I have this history, thinking about the migration and the genocide that people learned to call the potato famine, and all of what happened with that segment that moved and interacted in various ways with the descendants of slaves in the United States, and how it works into what happened in Eastern Europe. You had this thing that morphed into Nazism. The race that has to do with Nazism had to do with the Untermensch, the subhumanity of Slavs, was absolutely central. to the racist supremacy of white Aryans. And so this is what the reason it's so prevalent and so on the tip of my tongue and brain is that it's happening all over again.
Yes.
You
yes,
see
yes.
white Europe and Slavic Europe, Eurasia, the same thing. It is, you can't describe it any other way unless you're blind or you refuse to understand the nuance and demography and kind of presentation of what racism means and is. This is outright racist.
Right.
What is
right.
happening, the rejection of Russianism. Look at all those things about canceling Tchaikovsky and canceling vodka. And those are just so stupid. And
that's what's happening in Western Europe now. They're having these kinds of discussions about Russian art.
Yes, right, and they're the ones, the owners of phrenology. Right, the white Europeans, Americans had because of hung on to slavery for so much longer and the extermination of the First Nation people. Americans have a huge history, and of course, they share it from their bigger brothers in the Anglosphere. Like these are European values, classic. About the convolutions of the brain and how phrenology, like the science of race and the science of racism is born and bred in Europe and is so deeply ingrained that it moved continents away. You can't. You just press rewind, and now you see. Trump is a pig. There's no, he's not a peacemaker. There's nothing, you can't, but, if Hitler says 2 + 2 is 4, there's no reason to reject math. That's just a stupid, illogical thing when he can be doing whatever he's doing for all the wrong reasons, but it still is what it is.
Yeah.
It's the Europeans who won't give this up.
Right.
Trump is ready to, because it was a proxy war. There's no question about it. The proxy war between the U.S. and Russia. Ukraine says, I want to do this. This has nothing to do with you. General Pinochet.
Right.
Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, the guy we put in last week. This is not your struggle.
Right. It's your fight. You're gonna do the die.
Sorry. Yeah. Someone else is on deck. You die in 6 minutes, and then in 8 minutes we elect someone new, right? So, and the ugliness and the slipperiness with which the silken glove comes off and the iron fist shows in Trump's hand is completely dovetailing with all of that history. That's just what happens. That's what has always happened. But the Europeans are clinging to their share of it for some reason. And that, I think, and there are a lot of Russian observers who say the same thing. They may dislike American foreign policy. They see it as racist and imperialist, but they think Europeans hate Russian guts and have for 200 years. They have a antenna up for Europeans, Western Europe. And that is not puzzling to me, but I notice because, I listen, I follow as many things as I can, we were talking about talking heads on YouTube and stuff, but since anyone can do it, it's a great thing. I have a lot of friends who have Russian military history or Russian diplomacy, whatever. And so I'm hearing, I have my ear to the ground of people who came over here. They're fairly conservative. They're socially conservative. They're very kind of, what would you call it? Middle class. I don't know, not necessarily still orthodox,
Yeah.
but they're
So liberal, sort of.
conservative.
Yeah.
a little right wing, if you would call it that, in terms of social awareness. But they grew up in the Soviet Union, so they have they have a different view of, that people don't need to never retire, and they don't need zero sick time and zero education, and that's anathema. They think that is just an unbelievable assault on humanity. But even though you would think of them as being conservative and kind of put out by the fashion, Black Lives Matter,
Right.
LGBT stuff. You can see the stuff that is left leaning. They just think you can, you can feel it. But in this particular sense, it's automatic. They understand Stalin's response to Hitler. They understand the Untermensch. That these people are racist.
The racism at the heart of it. Hitler.
Nothing. Right.
Hitler attacked the Jews because they were non-white, and he attacked the Soviet Union because they were communists. Dan, hold it right there. We got to take a quick station break. Okay. We're going to come right back and pick up on where we left off.
Sure.
Are you in the process of writing or updating your will, trust, or estate plan? We invite you to consider adding WPFW as a beneficiary through a charitable bequest. Bequests can take many forms and are usually the largest and most impactful gift a donor will ever make. Your bequest will help to ensure the programming WPFW has provided for almost 50 years will continue into the future. More info available by email at plannedgiving@wpfw.org or by phone at 202-588-0999, extension 344. Or you can let us know you've already included PFW in your plans through those same channels so we can add your name to our growing list of legacy listeners. We are listener supported. We are Jazz and Justice. And because of your support, we are WPFW.
And we're back with Daniel Welch, a political commentator and analyst, talking about the similarities between racism in Russia and against the former Soviet Union, and racism against African Americans here in the United States. I found it so profound, Dan, what you were saying about how many Russians who come here and they're not maybe supporters of Black Lives Matter, and they think maybe it goes a little bit too far, but at the same time, they understand the racism at the heart of the attacks on Russia at this moment. And I thought that was so important because, of course, I think it goes without saying. I don't think anyone is saying that Russia necessarily is a savior for Black people or African Americans. I know that in my time in Africa, more than 20 years ago now, but the 4 years that I spent there, I know that people talked, they reminisced about the Soviet Union and their support for African liberation movements from South Africa to Angola, Zimbabwe, all these countries that relied on Soviet support, both financially and militarily. But they would say, they had their limits, right? The Soviet Union, they talked it a lot better than they walked it, which, was important at that time. It was good to have the support of the Soviet Union, if only most of it was rhetoric. And a lot of times
it also looks a lot better in absentia, because you can complain about it not going far enough And then if it's completely cut off, and
Right, right,
you have
right.
only more Lumumbas,
Yes, yes,
and
yes. Well, yeah,
more Leopolds. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
that is, and nothing to support the opposition to it. And of
Yes,
course, that goes. Also, I think the obvious thing is, people see it more clearly when it's applied to them individually and personally.
yes,
It's
yes, yes, yes.
natural.
Right, right.
My wife says, you see it. You see a white grandpa's mind turning, and he's holding the hand of his half-drowned
Right. That's true.
granddaughter
That's
crossing a
very
busy
true.
street.
That's very true. Yeah.
We got him. There's absolutely no way out now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's it.
It's
But
like, yeah. Obama complained about his white grandparents still holding on to some of their racism, but imagine how much worse they might have been had they never had a black grandchild like
of
Obama.
course. I mean, it's just like stuff you take for granted. And
Right.
that's what the speaking, talk versus the walk, all of those, and saying it was cynical, or I'm sorry, that's cynically saying later on that was just a systemic thing because they wanted to use it to defeat the US, and it was
Right,
the Russian
right.
Empire, the Soviet Empire against the US non-empire, and so on and so on. But first of all, you have people trained in a whole, a soup of these stimuli, of these influences of how to think and feel and talk. And how do you get a crowd to do what Harry Haywood saw?
Right,
Versus,
right. Yes, yes,
right.
yes, yes. It's
Versus great.
I mean, and this is, I think, I mean, I don't think you can, I mean, the Africans, even if Africans feel that, the Soviet Union maybe they weren't in it 100%, they still reflect upon the Soviet Union and their support fondly. And so you see, for instance, Angolans, Russians were very much involved in Angola. And so you see the late President Dos Santos, I think he married a Russian woman and had kids by a Russian woman, and Russian symbols are all over the Capitol. You see, there was a picture, I don't know, people say it was doctored, I don't know, but there was a photograph on the internet a few years ago, right after the war started against Ukraine, and there was a photograph, black and white photograph of Vladimir Putin when he was with the KGB, or he would have been with the KGB if this photograph is in fact real, where he's holding hands with the legendary Mozambican liberation hero and president who was assassinated by South African apartheid forces, Samora Machel, and they're holding hands walking through a village, right, which looks real, but I don't know. People say that it's
I don't, you know what? It doesn't have to be, because
right.
The connections, whether or not the connections were real,
yes,
they did exist, and guess what? This is the thing.
It continues.
They go
That's
dormant.
exactly right.
They don't go away.
Yeah, if that photo,
is what is happening right now. Is those connections are awakening, and you have people in kicking out ECOWAS, West Africa, French West Africa, telling France to just go to hell, and flying Russian flags in in public spaces en masse when they're having demonstrations, because they see, and it wasn't the Russians who kicked them out. It's either or which country you're in of the five, whatever. But
that's hell.
It exists now because it existed then, and you get the other connection. See, this is one of the things we talked about before is, and that's why I go with the rhyme, not that it repeats, but that it rhymes, because one of the reasons that I had this double major at school is this history and literature, that analyzing poetry and analyzing history are very similar. It's hard to explain, but that's just what is going on. So wait a minute. This sounds familiar. I've seen this before.
Yeah.
And you can do that if you have a literary kind of analysis of history, which I love, because you say, we're not talking, no, Putin is not a communist. That's not,
Right.
that's ridiculous. He doesn't want to redo the Soviet Union. That is
Right.
stupid. That just doesn't.
And Russia has not been imperialist since the Bolshevik Revolution. You can say it's
Right.
authoritarian. You can say all kinds of, but it's not
say what you want.
imperialist. It implies. But Dan, let me read to you very quickly this, because it speaks to exactly what you were just saying. This is an article that was in Al Jazeera about a year ago. And I haven't heard anything that would make me think things have changed for the worse there. So here it goes. In the heart of Burkina Faso's capital, Ouagadougou, a poster advertising free Russian language courses has been attached to the large, iconic model of a globe on a road intersection, which locals refer to as the, quote, United Nations roundabout. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union had a strong presence in Africa through diplomatic representation and cultural centers, including in Burkina Faso. 3 decades since Russia left large parts of Africa amid the breakup of the Soviet Union, however, signs of its return are visible in Burkina Faso, where the capital's walls are adorned with pro-Russian graffiti and Russian flags fly in the streets. Quote, something has changed and it is eye-catching. You can feel it immediately walking the streets and the roundabouts, said a resident who asked to remain anonymous for fear of repercussions from the government. In the aftermath of the January 22nd, 2022 coup, which overthrew the elected president, Roch Marc Christian Kabore, Russian flags began to appear during anti-French protests. At a time when Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was seeking re-election for a 5th term as leader of the country, is no longer welcome in many parts of the world following the invasion of Ukraine, Moscow is seen as a friend of Ouagadougou.
So
I'll stop there.
You know, it's really interesting because I have 2 kids now, two of our, actually a whole family that's come through our school who are from Burkina Faso. Their dad is from Burkina Faso. And so we've talked about this a lot. We've watched we have the flags, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and all this going on at the school. And so we've been following it closely along those lines, but we were aware also of the connection with the Russians. And it was absolutely forbidden. Talk about, censorship. It was forbidden to talk about in American social circles, American schools, especially in places that have a high, this is like blue state, blue city, blue state, really the most pro-war environment that has ever been since, I don't know, Korea. I can't imagine. I can't believe that there has been any organized political system as horrifically pro-war as the Democrat Party has been in this particular historical space. And one of the, I want to get back, I gotta get this because it's on my brain. I'm talking about the rebirth or dormancy coming back to fruition. There was a famous anecdote about some guy talking to a fisherman along the boardwalk in Havana, and they got into the thing about human nature, right? Socialism can't work because humans are selfish, says the American journalist, right? And this is just an older man fishing, again, like the citizens that Haywood, saw, just normal people. And he said, well, yeah, people are selfish, but they can lift heavy objects like the thing about the woman lifting a car to save her baby. They come to the question is, why would a government or a social system foment one half and not the other?
Right.
Why do you have a system that teaches people to be more selfish and makes them succeed through their selfishness and doesn't feed the other side? You can't tell me that it doesn't exist. Humans care about each other. You're an idiot. You have no biology, no history of evolution or anything. If you don't believe that, or never had a family, never know a family, anything, it's the essence of stupidity to say that is where the genes end.
Cynicism
stupid. That it's Gordon Gekko. That everyone is Gordon Gekko, and so we have to do it because that's the way it works. And so, just for someone to say this offhand, I thought is beautiful. I remember reading it probably 35 years ago, but why I'm bringing it up now is that the puzzle pieces were there and they're still there. And now they fall into place. You have China coming into Africa, building billions of dollars worth of roads and ports, doing something that the actual colonizers didn't. You can sow all your debt trap crap. You can do anything you want, but the Russians are doing it too with China. And they're as closer than they were before the Sino-Soviet split. They are closer. And guess what? Trump's big fake deal, because he's the deal, right? It's the deal. It's the deal, John. He's going to make a deal. That's what we're doing. We're doing the deal. We're doing the deal. I got another deal. Except that, he's trying to turn Kissinger into a used car sales, right? This is not shuttle realpolitik or shuttle diplomacy. This is a slumlord trying to make a real estate law. It's terrible. They're
from
bad
the White House, right?
They're bad at it, and they're using the wrong tools. That's the thing. But the thing is, Lavrov immediately said, actually, a friend of mine was one of the ones who interviewed him, and there's the
Russia's foreign minister,
Sergei
Lavrov.
Sergei Lavrov. He said, "Well, I don't know what they're thinking, but we're not going to dump anything that we're doing with China. Like we wouldn't be us if we would be tempted to turn against this people we've made deep inroads with and have connections that matter and last." And that doesn't necessarily have to do with sharing the communist ethos. And it doesn't have to do with sharing anti-racism in Africa. But it's the reason that it will stay together. That's the thing that I think that the poetry of it that I'm trying to make clear.
No, I get it.
People won't see. They say, well, they're not. They're just this. They're just that. They're just this. It's like, like what did I say earlier? I was saying, yes, okay, you can argue that point if you are in a holodeck with the whitest of white environments where nothing else gets in or out, and you can argue about these tiny nuances. Oh, well, they're doing this and that, and but you have life on the ground, and this hundreds of years, decades of experience in doing this. Remember, this is what they try to another racist crap, saying they're sending North Koreans, right? Okay.
Right. And they're not. Right.
Have the most advanced and best trained army in human history. Right? These people who have the Oreshnik missile. And they need
hypersonic missiles, right? They need
they needed to grab a few recruits from Pyongyang, right?
No, it's such a great narrative, though, Dan. Right? Like, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me finish, because this cuts right to the race thing. Russia, they didn't provide any pictures. They didn't, nothing. They said, well, they were in this, they were in that. And said, where? Where are they? Where are the flags? Where are the uniforms? Where are the faces? This is complete crap, right? And then they got a picture of some Asian looking something or other. And I heard Russians say, that's a Dagestani.
Right, right.
Those
Not a Korean.
Those are kids from Dagestan who are in the army.
Right.
That's
right,
not,
right.
that's ridiculous. They look Asian because a very large part of Russia.
Right. Is Asian. Yeah, exactly. It just, as I can say, Dan, you just made me think about what this really is about, which is, Russia may have some racism still but it's personal, it's not institutionalized. They have a culture where they don't rely upon institutionalized racism, or at least they have this history since 1917 of a culture that doesn't need institutionalized racism to move forward, right? And it reminds me, if I can say,
that is excellent, because that is the only thing that helps the American empire move forward.
Yes,
absolutely is wedded to it, needs it to the death, absolutely clings to it because it has no other chance.
Yes, that it has to have racism, right?
But you can say that it happens in China, in Russia. You can say that, but it is not absolutely integral to making the system work. But they were saying, not you should use the dollar. You should back us up. You should never do what we don't say with your foreign policy. Oh, wait. Because we are better than you.
Yeah.
We are exceptional.
Right.
We are the supremacist class and culture and race, and we do it right. We are the beacon of democracy, and they have to use that because the rest of it doesn't work. Yeah. And for it, not only the Chinese for thousands of years, Russians for hundreds of years, they come into a room, they see three people, we make deal. I shake your hand, she shake my hand. We have a big deal, we all have one.
Right. It's a
they
culture.
Don't have to be friends. They don't have to be race fellows. They don't have to. It just is what happens. During the Soviet period, this is what is. And this is what I was talking earlier to you about my thesis. And, I got the anti-Soviet, the Russia haters at Harvard, which said I didn't do it right. I had to go more anti-Soviet. And I was saying, Soviet is Russia, is this, is that. And now I see it coming back to fruition.
Right.
And they had these things. These are awesome things. They said, this is known as Soviet because it's red tape. How are things? Как дела? How are things? Как дела? And the answer is, дела идут, контора пишет. Дела идут means things are going, right? Wow. But then in the Soviet period, they added контора пишет, the office is writing, which means more red tape is being produced. The office, we're working on the plan, things are fine. But you get that thing, дела идут. How are things? They're going. Doesn't say how, does it? It just says joy dudes.
Right.
Whatever. And that's the Chinese one. You know the difference. I think, I don't know if this is apocryphal either, but the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah.
There's the Chinese expression which says the nail that sticks out gets hit on the head.
Yeah. These cultures that are based on collaboration and communication are antithetical to what we have here in the United States.
Absolutely.
In 2025. Dan, I'm
People
so sorry.
Don't understand that.
I wish we could talk for another hour, Dan. We have to call it
this one.
Right. We have to call the day. I'd like to thank executive producers Malaga Smith and Denise Young, our engineers today, Mike Musella and Kalia Chapman. Up next is the news and jazz stories. Thanks so much again, Daniel Patrick Welch.
Thanks for having me, John. Good to talk.
For WPFW News in Washington and WBAI in New York, I'm Sue Goodwin. Today is Thursday, March 27th. Here are some headlines. The Trump administration has moved Rumeysa Ozturk to the South Louisiana ICE Processing Center, according to court records filed today. The Turkish PhD student and Fulbright scholar at Tufts University was detained on Tuesday by masked federal immigration agents. Without supplying any proof, a DHHS spokesperson said Ozturk's visa had been revoked after an investigation found she had engaged in activities in support of Hamas. Ozturk's arrest follows similar actions from federal authorities targeting student activists and students who have spoken in support of Palestine, none of whom have been accused of committing any crime. In other news, the Trump administration announced today that 10,000 employees of the Health and Human Services Department would be dismissed as part of a major reorganization designed by Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. Together with previous layoffs, the move will bring the department down from about 80,000 employees to 62,000. The cuts will hit the Food and Drug Administration, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Institutes of Health, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. This comes just days after DHHS announced it is canceling tens of billions of dollars in federal grants that state and local health departments were using to track infectious diseases, health disparities, vaccinations, mental health services, and other health issues. In more news, a divided federal appeals court yesterday kept in place a temporary block on President Donald Trump's ability to use the Alien Enemies Act to quickly deport with no due process alleged members of a Venezuelan gang to a mega-prison in El Salvador known for its harsh conditions. In a 2-1 decision, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the 1978 law gave presidents near-blanket authority to detain and deport foreign nationals from U.S. territory during a declared war or invasion. The panel, however, ruled the invasion had to come from a foreign government rather than a gang. Meanwhile, lawyers for some of the deportees say their clients are not affiliated with the gang at all. The White House said it plans to appeal to the Supreme Court. And fallout continues after it was learned that top national security officials in the Trump administration added The Atlantic editor Jeffrey Goldberg to an unsecured Signal group chat discussing specific operational details about a U.S. attack on Houthis in Yemen. Roger Wicker, the Republican chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Jack Reed, the ranking Democrat, asked the Pentagon Inspector General for an expedited inquiry into the facts and circumstances around the episode. Asked by a reporter yesterday if his administration should take more responsibility for the chat leak, President Trump responded, quote, "I think it's a witch hunt. I wasn't involved in it. I wasn't there," close quote. Trump also said that